I think in most marriages, one spouse is always losing things. Is that a general consensus? Has anybody else experienced this? Nope, yeah, okay, only like one is raising their hand. Thanks, Jen, for your bravery. Okay, who wants to be really brave? Is that anybody's marriage where it's both spouses who are losing things? Okay, we will have a prayer team available up front after the service, because that's a lot of chaos to live in. So, let's see, it was about 9 years ago. I was planning this anniversary trip. It was our first year anniversary of Mark and my marriage, and he knew where we were going. We were going to San Francisco just for a long weekend, but he didn't really know what we were doing there. So I booked this like sunset cruise around the Golden Gate Bridge. I made nice dinner reservations. I found the cutest Airbnb. Like, I was pretty sure it was the house that Michelle Tanner grew up in, if you know. And I was so excited for this trip. All these surprises in there. But really, what I was looking forward to on this trip was I was going to tell Mark the news that we were pregnant. And this was our second pregnancy. This was our rainbow baby. Because we had just walked through a pretty dark season. And, sorry, this wasn't our first year anniversary. This was like our couple-year anniversary.
It sounded like, too, I wasn't planning anything.
You tried for the first year anniversary. No, this was a couple years into it. Gosh, I mean, once you've been married for a couple years, it's all a blur, right? It's a blur of goodness. This is probably like year 4, actually. Just kidding. Wow. Details don't matter. Anyway. So this weekend felt like a little glimpse of celebration after the end of a really dark season. And so it felt like there was a weight to it. There was a hope. There was a joy. And I just couldn't wait. And so it's Friday morning. We get up early. We're going to Long Beach Airport. We lived in Long Beach at the time. You know, Long Beach Airport, similar to Ontario, it's like proof of God's goodness to us. So you don't have to fly out of LAX. And so we get up early. We catch an Uber. Now, when we get in the TSA line, I'm the type that before I enter the line, I have my documentation ready. I have my boarding pass pulled up on my phone. Like, I'm not entering into the line. I'm a firstborn, so I have to follow the rules. I'm not entering into that line until I'm fully prepared. Mark is totally cool, absolutely chill, just waiting until they literally call us forward, and then he'll just pull it out. And he's always ready on time, and it's fine, but we're just different that way. And so we're inching up. It's almost our turn. We're one person away from being called. And I notice Mark is fidgeting in his pockets. And he's like, Rachel, do you have my license? Now, the sass factor was a little high for me at 6 a.m, and so I said, Mark, I'm not your mother. I'm your wife. I don't keep track of your stuff. I don't have your license. I actually thought he was joking. And he goes, no, really, I don't have my license. And there are some things in life you don't realize how much you need until it feels like they're gone. And I guess driver's licenses are one of those things, because I just start to see all these fun things I have planned for our weekend anniversary trip just crumble to pieces, because if he doesn't have his license, we can't get on that plane. We can't go up to San Francisco. None of these fun celebrations are going to happen. So I say, okay. He's like, maybe I left it in the Uber that we took. So we get on the app and we do that like report a lost item. They connect us with our driver. We're like, hey, you just dropped us off at the airport. I mean, he was a cool guy. We had told him about our plans, that we were celebrating our anniversary. I said, hey, is there any chance that my husband left a driver's license in the backseat of your car? And it's quiet for a few seconds, and then he comes back on and he's like, Mark Lohman? And I was like, yes, that's it. And I said, is there any way you can get back here to the airport as quickly as you can? Like, our flight leaves in like 45 minutes. We can't get on the plane unless we have Mark's license. I said, I'll pay you $100 if you can get here. I also thought it was very strategic, Louis. I was like, I would do it. He goes, there's only one problem. Like, I already picked up another passenger. I'm almost to LAX. And I was like, oh no. There are some things in life you just don't realize how much you need until it's like they're gone. Okay, so what's plan B? I call somebody who lived close to us. I'm like, hey, sorry to wake you up. I'll pay you $100. If you can go over to our house, here's the code to get through the front door. I said, now, if you go into my closet, on the shelf, there's a Jessica Simpson shoebox where I keep all of our important documents. There you'll find Mark's passport. Can you please get to Long Beach Airport as quickly as you can? If you can make it here in 20 minutes, I'll pay you $100. We can get on the flight. And she's like, yeah, no problem. I'm on it. Okay, so we're waiting out at the curb. Mark's like, by the way, my license wasn't lost, Rachel. It was just misplaced. Which, if you're the spouse that's always losing things, you're welcome to use that line. Now, if something is actually lost, you want to know what Mark says? I'm just living out the gospel. Things have to be lost before they can be found. I literally can say nothing back to that. So there you go. I just gave you guys plenty of material to work with. So we're waiting on the curb, waiting for our friend who I think is getting the passport. And we are really cutting it close to boarding. And this car pulls up and he rolls down the window and it's our Uber driver who I'm not expecting at this moment. And I'm like, wait, how did you get here? You told me he was like, I just dropped her off, my passenger. And I said, just call another Uber, ma'am. I'm sorry. I'm on a mission. Yeah, it was amazing. And so I give him the $100. I'm like, we're gonna do this. And then literally right behind him, our other friend comes with the passport. And I'm like, I have no money now. I am $200 out. There are some things in life you don't realize how much you need until it feels like you've lost them. And driver's licenses are one of those things, right? Yes. Yeah. But on a more serious note, hope is another. It wasn't until I was 29, I realized how much I had been relying on hope to propel me forward, to get me out of bed in the morning, to help me to dream about the future, until we walked through a pretty unexpected and dark season of our lives, and that was when our first baby died. And for the first time in 29 years, I glimpsed what it felt to live like with no hope. It just felt like there was this oxygen supply to my soul. It had been cut. And maybe if you've walked through seasons of grief and suffering and sadness, you felt that before too. It's a horrible feeling to feel hopeless, like stuck, disoriented, and you're scared to dream about the future, to even think about the future. In hindsight, my hope was never really gone. I just had a superficial understanding of hope in that time of my life. I wasn't living with like a deep, biblically rooted hope, the kind that only Jesus gives, because as I've learned, I'm not 29 anymore, that was about a decade ago. The hope that Jesus gives us is so much deeper, and it can't be shaken by circumstances. But I think a lot of us as Christians, hope is such a hard thing to wrap your head around because it's abstract. It can feel elusive. It's like, how do I put my finger on it? But I know what it is to have it, and I know what it is to feel like I'm without it. But I think a lot of us as Christians, we've been influenced by a cultural understanding of hope more so than we have a biblical understanding of hope. And so I did my best to kind of bullet point what I think these two contrasting definitions of hope are. So we'll put cultural's definition of hope up first. I think our culture defines hope as wishful thinking, as putting a positive spin on a painful situation. If you're able to do that, it's like, oh, that person has a lot of hope. Looking for or believing that there's a silver lining in everything. This is kind of the origin of that phrase, everything happens for a reason, which is a horrible thing to ever tell somebody if they're going through something hard, by the way. Cultural hope it can often look like this naive optimism, like, that person's out of touch with reality. Or it can also show up in this like grin and bear it mentality. I was visiting a church in Indiana with my family a couple years ago, and the pastor was talking about suffering, and he literally said, if you're going through a hard time, guys, just suck it up, buttercup. And I thought, ooh, I'm not really sure that's what I see Jesus doing. But that can also be a cultural understanding of hope. Or we think of hope as it glosses over the pain and the disappointment, it's like a Band-Aid. Or we think that in order to have hope, we have to stuff our pain and our hurt and our questions and our disappointment. Because I think cultural hope, the understanding of it at its core, is it views hope as being at odds with pain and darkness and hardship. Almost it's like hope is allergic to that. They can't exist in the same space. Which presents a lot of problems for when you walk through a hard season. So here's how I would define biblical hope. I would say it's an unshakable confidence that God walks with us in the darkness. It's an unwavering trust in God's redemption. Biblical hope is like this fuel that, the prophet Isaiah says allows us to soar on wings like eagles and to run and to not grow weary, even in pain, and to walk and not faint, even in darkness. Biblical hope is rooted. Literally, its roots are in redemption. And it's an attitude, it's a posture that is expectant for God to bring good out of evil. It's almost like you're waiting and you're looking around for it. When's God going to do it? And here's the most important thing. Biblical hope is not at odds with darkness. It's not the opposite of darkness. In fact, seeds of hope are often planted in darkness. That was true for Jesus' story. And we'll look at that together. But I hope that by the end of this, you'll see that that's also true of your own story. So I want you to see firsthand 3 areas of darkness in Jesus' life where seeds of hope were planted. And we'll put these up on the screen. We're going to look at 3 things that Jesus experienced before we see hope. And these are the 3 things. Jesus felt grief. Jesus was betrayed. And Jesus felt alone. So the first one, Jesus felt grief. We'll start in the book of Isaiah. So the book of Isaiah, it's written by a prophet. So this is years and years before Jesus comes. He's a prophet, and so he's telling about the future Messiah. And I think this is so interesting and also intentional. This is how he chooses to describe the Messiah. And it just makes me think, and if I was going to talk about Jesus to somebody who didn't know him, how would I introduce Jesus? Because I don't think it would be like this. Isaiah says, he was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. This verse has become just one of my favorites, which I know is odd to say. But in this verse, I met a Jesus that I could still trust in my grief. Because this is a Jesus who gets it. This is a Jesus who walked through sorrow and was rejected and was acquainted with grief. That means grief was like a friend to him. And it's not just surface level grief. It's not just any type of grief. It says deepest grief. And I grew up with this Americanized, sanitized version of Jesus, that he was like a hippie with a smile on his face all the time and long hair and peace signs walking through like a flower daisy field. And so if that's all that Jesus is, which Jesus is the definition of joy and happiness, absolutely. But if that's all that Jesus is, then how do we bring sorrow and pain and disappointment and doubt to a God that only represents joy? And I think that's how a lot of us may view Jesus. But that is not what the scriptures say about Jesus. Jesus felt grief. If you carry deep grief today, you share that experience with Jesus. Second thing, Jesus was betrayed. We'll turn now to the New Testament, to Matthew chapter 26. And, Matthew was a disciple of Jesus, but he also wrote a biography of Jesus' life. And this scene, it showed me this, that seeds of hope are planted in the darkest of places. These are the very raw and vulnerable moments of Jesus' life as he's faced with his own death. Starting in verse 36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, so stay here and keep watch with me." And then going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and he prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." And then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And then Jesus, he goes away a second time and he prayed, "My Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." And when he came back again, he found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and he went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise and let us go. Here comes my betrayer." If you know the story, what happens next is that one of Jesus' 12 closest friends, his disciples, one of them, named Judas, turns on Jesus and has him handed over to the Roman government to be killed. Jesus knows this. And so in this garden scene, here's what happens again and again. Jesus asked his disciples to keep watch. They fell asleep. Jesus asked them to do something that he really, really needed at a time when his soul felt sorrowful to the point of death. Like, this is one of the hardest moments, the weakest moments of Jesus' life. And he's like, "Guys, I really need you to get my back right now." Not once, not twice, but 3 times, and they fall asleep on him. And then he is outright betrayed by one of his own. If you are desperate for hope to touch an area of your life where you have felt relational betrayal, if you have felt that sting of betrayal, thinking that you could count on someone in your darkest hour and they walked away, you share that experience with Jesus. See, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus experiences first the death of relationships that really mattered to him. Often, I think the greatest pain in our stories, it's caused by fractured, broken relationships, by betrayal, backstabbing, gossiping, divorce. Jesus experienced the betrayal of human relationships too. He understands that pain. And in this garden soil, seeds of resurrection hope are actually being planted. First, we see that Jesus felt alone. So Jesus felt grief, Jesus was betrayed, and then lastly, we see Jesus felt alone. So if we flip one book over to Mark, we'll be in chapter 15, starting in verse 33. Jesus hangs on the wooden cross just minutes away from his death, and we see that he feels deeply alone. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, words that mean, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In other words, why have you left me? Jesus felt forsaken in one of the scariest, most painful moments of his life here on earth. Completely alone. He felt abandoned. I also think it's important to note here that Jesus, his relationship with the Father was so close, he didn't hold back from asking God why. Where are you, God? Why have you left me? If you have felt that sting of loneliness in your grief, if you felt alone, if you've spent most of 2025 crying out to God, why? Or where are you? You share that experience with Jesus. Jesus felt alone, Jesus felt betrayed, and Jesus felt grief. And not only does that change the way that we approach grief and hardship and brokenness in our lives today, but I think this radically changes our understanding of hope. And you might wonder, well, what does this have to do with hope? I think it has everything to do with hope, because if the darkest parts of Jesus' life weren't wasted, if the darkest parts of Jesus' life is where seeds of hope were actually planted, that's really good news for the dark parts of our stories. See, when we look at these events that I just read, they're part of Holy Week. It's easy to miss the significance of the dark soil where those seeds of hope are planted before the resurrection. Because a lot of us think that we have hope, a lot of us think that we know hope, but resurrection hope, it's not something like a driver's license that can be lost. It's not something like a Band-Aid or a silver lining to your pain. Resurrection hope is so much more. When we grasp that resurrection hope comes from seeds that are actually planted in the darkest parts of your life, it can change. It will change the way that you view darkness as you walk through it. You no longer have to feel bound to shame or hopelessness over those broken parts of your story, because you can look at the life of Jesus and have proof, and this is something that Jesus and Jesus alone can offer. No other faith system can offer this. The darkest chapters of Jesus' life, the betrayal and the crucifixion, are the ones that ended up leading to the most powerful act of God's redemption, the resurrection. And we know that, right? And we say yes and amen to that. And we want that, of course. But man, if we're honest, I think sometimes that feels like a distant truth. Okay, that might be true of Jesus' story, and it makes me feel hopeful, but that feels so far removed from like touching any part of my story. See, we stand on the side of history where we know how the enemy was taking this in Jesus' life. And he looked like death had the final word. And we know how God was going to take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. We know that. But it's hard to see that in our own stories as we're confined to the middle of them, stuck in the silent Saturday. We hold the pain and the death of Friday so close. And that's all that we can see. Of course, we want redemption. Of course, we want the healing. But a lot of us, that's all we see. It's just right here, what's in front of us. How are we going to get to that resurrection hope? And I think it's important to remember that that's exactly how the first followers of Jesus felt. They had no idea that Resurrection Sunday was going to be on the other side of their silent Saturday. They were confined to the middle. They were stuck in the waiting. Whenever Mark and I start a new series on Netflix, we watch a couple episodes, and then Mark loves to go into research mode. So he'll beeline to his laptop. I go up to bed. He goes on his laptop, and he spends like an hour researching the historical context. He wants to know the facts. He wants to read all the plot predictors. And he says he does this so that he can best understand the series as we watch it. But I always hate that this happens because he accidentally always finds out how the story ends without me. And it frustrates me because I just want to sit and go episode by episode and enjoy the mystery of not knowing how things are going to unfold and be surprised when one character does this. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. And I look over at Mark and he's just like, Crazy how that happened. I like to let my mind just wander through the possibilities and the what ifs along the way. But I struggle to live out my own story that way. I want to take Mark's approach. I plead with God. I'm like, God, show me the plot spoilers so I can settle back into predictability and prepare my heart for what lies ahead. God, would you fast forward me through the waiting, through the middle? I just want to know how the story ends. I just want to know if it's even possible for you to bring anything redeeming out of this dark chapter where it feels like death has won, where it feels like the enemy's had the last say. I just want to know, God, will you show me? After my miscarriage, I remember just begging God to give me signs that I would be able to get pregnant again. And not only that I'd be able to keep a baby for 10 months and be able to deliver a living child. I was just pleading with God, like, show me that it's possible, God. Show me that one day we'll become parents. I just wanted these questions answered when I was in the middle of that chapter. I wanted to know those with certainty. But God, He never gave me those answers. Instead, over that season, He invited me into healing and into hope, independent of the outcome of what that chapter was going to be. God was more concerned with the transformation of my heart in that season. Was I going to allow this grief to make me more like Jesus, or just harden my heart? Was I willing to forgive those I blamed for my loss, like God and my own body, even before I could become pregnant again? Was I willing to draw close to God, even if He didn't show me in detail how hope would play out in my story? See, sitting in the middle of your story, it's a transformative space where sacred soul work happens. Author Jerry Sitzer, who has walked through a lot of loss, he writes this: inner transformation could be, and often is, the real plot of the redemptive story. And I love this quote from Beth Moore. She says, "It may well be that when all is said and done, and our life stories are penned to their final paragraph, the thickest part of the plot was what we did with what was broken." The thickest part of the plot may well be what we did with what was broken. Maybe this past year has been one of your hardest. Maybe there have been some unexpected losses, catastrophic ones, that have totally blindsided you and left you wondering where God is in your life. Maybe you're sitting here today wondering, how is hope even going to touch my life again? Jerry Sitzer again says that in grief, we have an invitation to remember the past as redemptive memory, not as an idealized part of our story to which we are always wanting to return, or as a giant regret that we wish we could go back and change, but as a chapter in a larger redemptive story we continue to live out in the present moment. See, a temptation is to live with our hands tied to the past, always wanting to go back, which could actually be saying, I believe the best is behind me. I believe God's best has already passed, and therefore resurrection must not apply to my story. I think living with resurrection hope in the present remembers the past and even acknowledges, man, I miss that. I long for that. But I'm still going to look at my present and look towards my future with a curiosity that I believe God can do something still. And a hope and an anticipation to see how God will bring redemption out of the dark chapters of my story. Author Justin McRoberts writes this: mourning does not simply become dancing. It must be planted in the soil of hope and good counsel, watered with the tears of uncurled grief, and then harvested by the choice to move my feet again. Let me read that one more time. Mourning does not simply become dancing. It must be planted in the soil of hope and good counsel, watered with tears of uncurled grief, and then harvested by the choice to move my feet again. would you dare to make the choice this morning to move your feet again? To walk the broken chapters of your last year. Maybe they've been more than just the past year, but to walk them toward the hope of Jesus. Knowing that this is not a God who doesn't get you. This is a God who also has felt grief, who also has felt betrayal, and who knows what it is to feel alone. The enemy will work overtime to try and convince you that your life and your story is unredeemable. How many of you have had chapters of your past, or maybe you're in today that feels this way, like there is nothing redeeming that God can do in this situation. It's impossible. It's too dark. That addiction is too strong. My body is too broken. This grief is too deep. My marriage is too far gone. Sure, God can bring beauty out of her story or his life, but not mine. Maybe you've accepted death over whatever dark thing you're walking through. See, the enemy knows that if he can keep you bound by chains of shame and hopelessness, you're not going to encounter the freedom that Jesus has for you. The enemy also knows that if he can keep you quiet about the darkest chapters of your story, you're not going to be walking around talking and testifying about how the resurrected hope of Jesus has changed your life. And the enemy wants nothing more than for you to believe that beauty can come out of everyone else's pain but yours. And we just have to name that. See, nobody thought that anything redeeming could possibly come from this humiliating crucifixion of Jesus, the Messiah. In fact, his disciples were so full of fear and shame and embarrassment that they had put their hope in this supposed Messiah who then ended up dying a very humiliating human death on a cross, that they went and hid. Because they knew, surely, he must not have been the Messiah, because Messiahs don't die. And then Messiahs don't die with such humiliation. We look like hope-struck fools. And so they went and hid. They feared for their lives. Nobody thought that anything redeeming could come out of that. Everyone thought this is for sure the end of the story. Death has had the final word. And I just know that there are some of us here who feel that way today. But perhaps you've been holding a hope that was based on life being good and not on the resurrection of Jesus. Because resurrection hope, it has already battled death 2,000 years ago on a wooden Roman cross. In the silence that followed, hope appeared absolutely defeated. But unexpected as it always is, hope had the last word. Hope won then in Jesus' story. And guys, it's 2,000 years later, and hope is still winning today. And that's because this resurrection hope is not just something that we can neatly package and put up on a slide even. This resurrection hope has a name, and his name is Jesus. The thesis of our Christian faith is that hope comes out of darkness. Hope comes out of death. There is no other worldview or religious system that can claim this. Because Jesus is the only one who is living proof of this. And so we may think that we have hope. But is it a hope that can do this? I think that is the invitation for each of us. I'm going to invite the worship team up. I have seen God firsthand in my life bring hope out of the darkest chapters. I wouldn't stand before you and give a message on hope coming out of darkness if my own life couldn't testify to that. When I look back at the darkest chapters of my life, that's where I find the most seeds of hope were planted. And I guarantee I'm not the only one. It's in your story too. It's in the person's story next to you. Because the crazy thing about our stories is that each of our stories reflects the gospel. There is everything good, there is creation as God intended, followed by the fall. Each of us has brokenness, broken dreams, broken bodies, broken hearts at some point in our stories. But then we also have chapters of redemption, where there's the new hope of resurrection. And so when your story is told with all of its chapters, when you're not afraid to leave out some of the chapters, you're like, no, this is my whole story. If I tell this story all together, it reflects the gospel, the good news of Jesus, that what I thought was broken and hopeless beyond repair, God has touched and he has redeemed. He has brought absolute light into the darkness. He has been able to take what the enemy meant for evil and somehow, in a great mystery of redemption, turn it for good. Your story has the power to point somebody else to the saving hope of Jesus. You're not just living some random story. You have a really powerful tool in your back pocket. What if we weren't afraid to share it? So when you see God take the dead parts of your story and bring them back to life, I think that's when you start living with real resurrection hope. I thought that I had hope before my baby died, but I had confused hope with a predictable story and a comfortable faith. It was only through grief, loss, and pain that I found resurrected hope. And that's an active hope. It's a real hope. It's a transformative hope. It's a story-changing hope that only Jesus can give. Would you stand with me? And if you're comfortable, would you mind just holding your hands just out at your waist? I almost feel like this image of, we're holding a book closed tightly. And then we open our hands and it's like, okay, God, I make my life an open book before you, including the dark, painful chapters that I'm ashamed to even bring before you, even though you already know, God. Even the chapters that I'm convinced are too broken, that I'll never see your hope touch down. Lord, today I want to believe that hope is possible, even in the darkest chapters of my story. Would you just say under your breath or in your head, come, Lord Jesus. I want your hope to touch my story. God, as we reflect on the year behind us, we're going to boldly and audaciously ask that you take what the enemy meant for evil, and God, that in the coming year we would see you turn it for good. Let's be a people who are desperate for the hope of Jesus to touch our stories. God, we want your deep resurrection hope. We want to see it again in real time in each of our stories, God. And so our worship team is going to lead us in a few songs. And I encourage you to keep this dialogue going between you and God, the author and perfecter of your faith. That you would surrender what feels hardest to give to him. We're going to have a prayer team up here. Would you come and get prayer? Say, God, I just need your hope. I need an infilling of your hope in the year ahead. There's nothing to be ashamed of. This is a safe place where we believe that God can do the impossible. Would you make the choice to move your feet and walk towards his loving arms today?